Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video I'm so excited about. It's one of my favorite recommendation style videos to film. That's right, today I'm going to be recommending some of my favorite fantasy novels with a romantic component. And in my professional fantasy reader opinion, there is quite the spectrum of fantasy and romance that you could enjoy when you're picking up a fantasy novel. So today I'm really trying to recommend books across that spectrum. If you're looking for something that is incredibly romance forward, I've got you covered. Or if you're looking for a fantasy novel that more has romance as a subplot line, I've also got you too. But before we dive into the recommendations themselves, first a word from this video's sponsor, which is Curology. I'm so excited to be partnering up with Curology for this video. I am truly such a lover of skincare. My nightly and morning skincare routine is one of my favorite parts of my day, but in particular, I've truly been loving the Curology products I've been using on a regular basis within my routine itself. But if you're not familiar, Curology is the leader in providing for you prescription-based skincare sent directly to your door. The convenience of this, I promise you, is truly unmatched. Through Curology, you're of course able to access an array of classic skincare products, from moisturizer to cleanser to even a lip balm, with the vanilla flavor being my favorite. In particular, I do need to give a shout out to the Rich Moisturizer. I recently upgraded to a full size of this from the travel size I had. It's been lovely, especially with the winter season upon us. It's truly rich and it's truly moisturizing, I must say. But I would have to say my favorite part of Curology is the ability to work directly with a skincare provider to gain access to skincare products that have certain active ingredients, target skin concerns like acne or fine lines and wrinkles. I've been working with my provider to start using a retinoid-based product to help target fine lines and in general just bring back a bit of bounciness into my face and skin, and I have been loving it so much. I recently upgraded to even a larger size. I use this a few nights a week in combination with the moisturizer, and it's truly been a game changer. Such an easy step, and I've truly been loving the results. And I also love that I'm able to communicate with my skincare provider to see if any updates or changes need to be made to my custom formula along the way as well. Not to mention, when I need a refill, everything is sent again directly to my door, meaning I can spend more time on reading books versus running errands. I of course have a special offer to share with you guys today. If you click the link in my bio, you're able to get 50% off your first box, which includes your own customized formula based on your specific skin needs, as well as up to 6 free skincare essentials, all sent directly to your door, which we love so much. But again, thank you so much to Curology for sponsoring this video. But without further ado, let's go ahead and dive back into the recommendations. Alrighty, so as I said, I'm going to be recommending a few different categories of fantasy romance books. The first category I'm going to be focusing in on is the romantic fantasy category. In my mind, these books do have a very central romantic plot line, but it's more about the yearning, tend to have very lyrical writing, and they're also very swoon-worthy. It's about the romance, not necessarily about the spice, you know? And I will also say they all tend to have this sort of murky historical fantasy setting, or at least the ones I tend to pick up. The first book that I feel like perfectly captures this vibe is A Far Wilder Magic by Alison Saff. This is a romantic historical fantasy story that is perfect for fans of Fullmetal Alchemist, because in a lot of ways this reads as Fullmetal Alchemist fanfiction in the best ways possible. This book is set in a small town in kind of a turn of the century setting. In this world, magic exists within the form of alchemy, and we have two main characters in the story. The first is Margaret, and she lives in a very small town with her mother, who is a very world-renowned alchemist, and she consistently and constantly leaves their home to travel out into the world to try to find the answers to her big scientific questions, leaving Margaret to kind of live a very quiet and lonely existence. She also struggles with the town itself, as she's often ostracized for her cultural and religious background. Margaret herself dreams of a future where her mother will stay at home. She also is rather skilled as a huntswoman in this town, and she's very close with her pet dog. She's also very reserved and quiet. Our other main character is Weston, and he dreams of being an alchemist, not only because he's passionate about the field, but he also views it as an avenue to lift his family out of poverty, giving him the opportunity to support not only his mother, but his sisters too. However, though, Weston is running out of options and opportunities as he's constantly let go from every apprenticeship that he ever has, and he finds himself on Margaret's doorstep because he's looking to basically apprentice with her mother, but her mother is not there. Almost immediately, these two characters do not like each other very much, and they're also incredibly different, where Margaret, again, is very reserved. Weston is very charismatic and likes to put himself out there. However, though, they form an unlikely alliance as there is this mythical hunt that has arrived in the town. Basically, there is this mythical creature, a fox, that appears and kind of creates a lot of mischief in all of the surrounding areas, and there's a competition put on every time it appears, saying whichever pair of alchemists and hunters successfully take on this creature not only wins a large prize of money, but also can keep the bones, which is important for various alchemic experiments, if you will. These two characters enter this hunt together and begin to work with one another. I really enjoyed this story. First and foremost, I loved the romantic pacing. I loved our two characters as they began to get to know each other, but also kind of have to confront their own emotions and the things that they are personally running away from. There's great discourse about belonging and family, and also the struggles of living in a small town. And all of the great character moments were really brought together with a rather riveting plot of this competition, which is at the heart of the story. It's a smaller scale fantasy novel, but I do feel like the fantasy elements in combination with the really sweet, well-paced romance made this an absolute page turner. Plus, again, Full Metal Alchemist vibes, 100%. The next book I have to recommend within this category, I feel like is one of the more popular books within this, what I'm calling almost a subgenre, and that is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross, another book set in sort of a murky, historical fiction fantasy setting. This time though, magic is sort of embedded in everyone's everyday life, from the technology that they use to the wars that they're forced to fight in. This book is centered not only within a city and following our two main characters who are journalists, but there's also this sort of larger conflict at play where the gods of this world have been in conflict with one another, and humans basically fight for these various causes at the front of this war. In the story, we're introduced to our two main characters who work at the same paper and who are rivals, both vying for the same sort of editorial position within their workplace. That's right, this book is rivals to lovers. Iris and Roman hate each other, and while both coming from very different backgrounds, they both experience family difficulties in their own ways, and they take it out on each other at work. They're both driven and fantastic writers, and unbeknownst to both of them, they have been writing back and forth to each other at night through like a magical loophole, spilling their hearts to one another in a way that could only be described as the best dramatic irony possible. They hate but love each other oh so much. Things get much more complicated as the war begins to heat up even further, and they both decide to be wartime correspondents traveling to the front of this war, and their relationship and their secret letters also become more intertwined than you could ever imagine. I love the combination of the back and forth that these two characters have. The banter, the will they won't they is fantastic, and I also love that in combination with the absolutely beautiful letters that these characters are writing to one another. The romance is real. Just you reading and waiting for them to realize what is going on is just truly delicious. Rebecca Ross's writing style is always stunning as well. Her just ability to create such lovely characters and setting and ambiance is just one of my favorite things out there, and I love all of her books quite a bit, and I feel like she has such a way with the romance fantasy combination, and this for sure is one of my favorite books that I've read this year. And then the last book I'm going to recommend within this category is A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. This is another fantasy novel set in a murky turn-of-the-century historical setting, but this time we're dealing with fairies in this book. In this story, we're introduced to our main character, Effie, and Effie has to believe that fairy tales are real. And that is because for as long as Effie can remember, she has been haunted by visions and dreams of the fairy king. And she's also constantly been told her whole life that what she sees is in fact not real. She has also found a lot of solace growing up reading a collection of stories centering around the fairy king and a young woman who is able to successfully kill him. At the beginning of the story, Effie finds herself in college. You also very quickly get the sense that something is very wrong in Effie's life, and I do want to give a trigger warning for assault within this book. Effie is a young architect student, but she's also looking for a way out, an opportunity to sort of leave the situation that she's currently in, and she stumbles across kind of an opportunity where students can submit designs to actually her favorite author's estate. The winner gets to travel to this estate and help transform the property into their vision. Effie wins, she leaves the school and travels there, and everything very quickly begins to fall apart, and she also stumbles into a young man who is very much her like academic rival in this situation, who is determined to also kind of unearth the truth behind this author's life and legacy, and they actually begin to work together to try to solve this mystery, but things again get complicated very, very quick. Not only is this book just absolutely mesmerizing to read, the writing style and the ambiance of the story is just delicious. This book, more than anything, is Effie's story. Watching her journey as a main character kind of seize back her power, her life, her perspective of reality, and shake off all the people who have told her that she can't do something, that she's fragile, that she's weak, that she's not able to see things as clearly as other people. Was just a beautiful thing to read. Watching her and the relationship of our other main character begin to form and blossom was also lovely too. That in combination with just a mesmerizing fae-centered mystery was great. This old crumbling house was bizarre. The mystery surrounding this author and his family and the legacy kept me absolutely captivated. Sort of nature-focused creepiness of what was going on just worked so well, especially in relation to the fae elements of this book. There's romance, there's mystery, and there's so much wonderful character work at play too. I really loved this book. It's so stunningly written, and again, I feel like a perfect book within that sort of romantic fantasy category. The next two fantasy books I have to recommend, I feel like both have all of the fun, steamy elements of romantasy, but are very much like a standard fantasy story. So there is steamy, angsty romance, but there's also a lot of very intense, action-forward plot lines as well, and I love both of them so much. First book within this category I'm gonna recommend is Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare. I loved this book so much. This was Cassandra Clare's adult fantasy debut, and it had so many entertaining elements to it. I simply could not put it down, and I'm dying for the next installment so much. It was steamy and angsty, but it also had so much incredible world building, and the politics of this world absolutely captivated me. This is a dual perspective fantasy story set in a city-state called Castellane. Here, the powerful and the rich rule the day, constantly looking for their next hedonistic thrill. Also, this city-state kind of has their power not based off of their like military might, but instead their trade relations, which I think is really important and adds a very interesting wrinkle to everything going on. In this book, we read from two primary main characters. The first is Kel, and he is someone called a sword catcher, basically raised and trained from a young age to be able to impersonate the crown prince of this kingdom, not only being his bodyguard, but double and possibly even his sword catcher, dying for the prince one day if duty calls. The other main character we follow is Lynn, and Lynn is from a cultural group that is able to still harness magic. They use this magic in healing or other types of charms, and because they're still able to access magic in a world that has no magic, they are incredibly ostracized and othered, so much so that they have to live separately and also follow an entirely different set of laws within this world. Lynn herself is a healer, and we see her kind of get involved in politics, and Kel and her begin to cross paths. Outside of having just an absolutely riveting like political plot lines and like understanding the alliances and how this city-state works, I truly also just loved all of the different characters and the possible like romantic plot lines we could follow. The pacing of this book is divine, and the different romantic tropes at play are aplenty. I was hooked by not only like the fantasy elements of this, but the characters and romantic plot lines too. Needless to say, I was obsessed, and everyone needs to give this book a try. The next book I have to recommend is Immortal Longings by Chloe Gong. This is another adult fantasy debut by a well-known and well-loved author, and this is also an Antony and Cleopatra Shakespearean fantasy retelling. And again, the setting and action of this plotline paired with a very unexpected sort of romantic entangling made this book so hard to put down. But this book is set in kind of a fantasy meets cyberpunk setting. It's set in a fantasy world that has a very traditional like political makeup with a king and a queen and a castle and all of this. The city itself has a very like cyberpunk, decaying technology vibe to it. It's set in a city with a very large population, and there's not enough work, there's not enough food, there's not enough opportunity to go around. And instead of the kingdom kind of addressing these issues and trying to actually help their populace, instead they try to keep them distracted with violence and the off chance opportunity to gain fame and fortune. And they do this by basically hosting this once-a-year competition where 50 members basically are picked at random to fight to the death to achieve, again, a giant purse and an opportunity for a new life. This competition is not held within an arena, but instead played out over the entirety of the city, which adds a very fascinating wrinkle into the entire equation. And a very important aspect to this world, too, that I do need to call out is the magic system itself. Basically, people are able to hop bodies by just making eye contact. And the only way they're able to tell that someone else is possessing another body is that their eye color will change, which is a very fascinating magic system that Chloe Gong does a great job explaining and expressing within this work. In this story, we're following two main characters that are both entering this very dangerous competition for their own reasons. One is for revenge, the other is to basically win the prize money to help their long lost childhood love. They make an unlikely alliance in this story and begin to work with one another, and things really begin to unfurl from there. The competition element of this book is absolutely gruesome. This book is so bloody, it's so dark, and absolutely impossible to put down in terms of trying to figure out what in the world is going on. The political elements of this were just so entertaining too, and that in combination with some of the romantic plot lines, I was just hooked. I read this book in like a 24-hour period, and I just felt like all of the elements made it highly entertaining, and I truly cannot wait for the next installment. It was just a knockout for me, and by far my favorite Chloe Gong book I've read. Alrighty, moving on to the next category, which are the pure romantasy recommendations. These books are very steamy, very angsty, very romance forward as it relates to the plot. They definitely have other plot elements, but I would say I personally at least read these books for the romance when picking them up. The first book I have to recommend is the Crowns of Nyxia series. The first one being The Serpents and the Wing of Night by Carissa Broadbent. This is a high fantasy vampire competition story. In this story, we follow our main character Oria, and she is the human adopted daughter of the vampire king of this land. And she has been raised her entire life to not only trust no one, but also has been training to like survive this very dangerous world and court that she has lived in her entire life, and also preparing for the day that the like queen and goddess of all vampires comes down and kicks off the competition of the ages that happens between vampires, and the winner basically gets one wish granted. And she wants to participate in this competition for her own desires and needs. And at the beginning of this book, that competition basically kicks off. And wow, is it bloody? Is it intense? And of course, along the way, she meets a very hot, mysterious vampire with complicated political alliances that draws her into his fold, and things get complicated as you would expect. Listen, this book has a lot of action, it has a lot of politics, it has a lot of adventure. I'm not gonna lie, I felt like those parts were well done, but not the primary reason I read this book. The romance and drama and the enemies to lovers that also exist in this book, highly entertaining. And I've also read the sequel, and I really enjoyed where the story sort of expanded from there. This does have fantasy elements, but I will say my favorite part is definitely the romance, and it was a lot of fun. Plus vampires, who doesn't love a vampire fantasy novel? The next book I have to recommend is the Hidden Legacy series by Ayana Andrews, the first one being Burn for Me. This is an urban fantasy series that I've also been highly entertained by, and I do think has a perfect combination of steamy romance forward, but also a very engaging plot along the way. This book is set in a world where magic and magic users exist, and they basically form together into different magical families, and these families control everything from the politics to just like the cities that everyone lives in. Magic users also can vary in power from kind of low-ranking members to the highest and most powerful member of each family, which is called a prime. Our main character Nevada has magic, and her ability is to be able to tell when someone is lying to her, which is very handy for her profession as a private investigator, as sort of the head of her family's like small private investigator firm, which focuses primarily on smaller concerns like cheating husbands and financial crimes, things like that. However, though, at the beginning of book one, she's drawn into a very dangerous and powerful case, basically blackmailed by someone who's even more powerful in her life. This results in her not only having to risk her life, but also cross paths with a person named Mad Rogan, who is just as alpha as you would guess from his name. They have to work together, they have to solve various mysteries and crimes. Here's the deal, I just think this series is so entertaining. First and foremost, I love Nevada as a main character. I love the magical world that this book takes place in. I love all the mysteries that our characters have to solve and the evolution of the plot itself. It really balloons in very unexpected directions. I love the family element of this series, and of course, I love the dramatic, angsty, enemies to lovers sort of situation that exists between our primary main characters. It's just a lot of fun. Ayana Andrews has a lot of other books within this world too that I plan to continue on reading with, but I have to say the Hidden Legacy series, I read each one in like 24 hours. They're just a blast in my world. You know what I mean? Alrighty, and we have reached the final category of books, and that are fantasy books that are by no means trying to be a romance-forward story, but happen to have a very compelling and intriguing romantic subplot line to the book. There's romance here. There's romance that I found to be absolutely delightful, but it's also not the primary concern of the story too, or it just adds to the overall plot and story. And these are all just exceptional fantasy books through and through. The first book I have to recommend is The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan, one of my current favorite fantasy series out there. And I'm not gonna lie, there's a romantic plotline within this series that took me by such surprise, and the angst and drama that it's brought to the story, it has made me love this series even more. This series is set in a fantasy kingdom that is ruled by an emperor, and the emperor basically enforces his laws through individuals called justices, which roam the land investigating various crimes and are able to act as the judge and executioner on behalf of the emperor himself. One of the most powerful justices in all of the land is called Sir Conrad von Volt, and at the beginning of the story, we follow him as well as a variety of characters as they begin to take on and investigate a case of aristocratic corruption. This story, though, is not told from the perspective of Sir Conrad von Volt, no, but instead the perspective of his apprentice, and she is recounting all of the various things that are happening throughout this story, and she's also writing about it from the future. So there's this really interesting element of like reflection and humor too, which I love so much. Book one is absolutely amazing, but the politics and how the entire world is cracked open throughout book one and into book two makes this series impossible to put down. The political conspiracies, all the bureaucratic mess of a takeover is just stunning to read. I loved book one. I love book two even more. And again, a very unexpected romantic plotline is a part of this book and is one of the many reasons why I love this series too. It's so good. Next book I have to recommend is The Spear That Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. This was a recent read for me and a recent new love of my fantasy life. This book is just so incredible for so many different reasons. Structurally, it's one of the most unique books I've ever read. It's a beautifully written fantasy tale that absolutely swept me away on all fronts. And if you're surprised to see this book in this video, don't be, because the history and story that is told within this book is said to be, above all, a love story. But The Spear That Cuts Through Water is a stunning work of fiction. It is a layered storytelling experience. In it, we follow our main character who is sitting down at his grandmother's kitchen, and she is telling him the story of their ancestors. And that storytelling experience is layered with our main character who is now telling this story to other people in his life, and also as our main character is being told this story in a magical theater through time. And then as a reader, we're also reading and experiencing this story head on as well. And the story is that of a journey of two young men transporting a mythical divine being to freedom to help basically free the land from the tyranny of this very evil kingdom that has been in place and run by not only the emperor, but his terrible sons too. The writing, concept, and structure of this book is so perfectly executed. It was one of the most stunning reading experiences I've ever had. The characters too will just burrow right into your heart and live there. And again, this book has a beautiful love story, a part of what is a massive tale of war and change and desperation and everything else that goes along with it. I loved this story so much, and the characters of this book I will never forget. The Spear That Cuts Through Water is one of my new favorite fantasy books of all time, and yes, there is a beautiful and important romantic subplot line as well. And the last book I have to recommend is a sapphic enemies to lovers political leaning fantasy of your dreams. That is The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. The tension that exists within this book, I feel like we throw the term like enemies to lovers around rather loosely, and it's used a lot in romantic fantasy where people dislike each other but then like each other rather quickly. The enemy situation within this book is so complicated and so not straightforward, and also drawn out and explored in actually a very satisfying way. It is a must to pick up, especially if you like this trope. But this story follows our two main characters. The first is a princess who has been trapped by her brother within the crumbling walls of a temple. Here she lies in wait not only as a prisoner, but also biding her time to get her inevitable political revenge against him. The other character we follow is the maidservant to this very princess, a woman who has been in hiding, forced to disavow her family, her magic, where she comes from, and she has been biding her time to also get her revenge against those who have hurt her and her family the most. These two characters obviously are constantly in close proximity with one another, get to know one another, but this book politically is not straightforward at all. And the motivations of our characters are constantly almost at odds with one another, even within themselves, which just makes a very intoxicating read. This is a slow burn political novel, a slow burn character development novel, and it is just one that will grip you from page one. Enemies to lovers is an understatement. This book is an absolute page turner. And I feel like a great example of how romance as a part of a plot line can work in such a fascinating way, particularly as a character study. Alrighty guys, those are some of my current favorite romantic fantasy recommendations. Again, big shout out to this video sponsor, which is Curology, for working with me for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you soon with another video soon. Goodbye!